Lynn, you're a California guy. You were born and raised in San Francisco. You went to Southern California, Los Angeles, glamour. And I'm just wondering, going back to draft day 1974, when you heard that you were drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, other side of the universe for you in so many ways, what was your thought?
Didn't really have a whole lot of thoughts about it. It wasn't a decision that I could make on my own for myself and say I wanted to go to this team or to that team. I didn't know much about Pittsburgh. I didn't know anything about Pittsburgh. I knew they had a pretty tough defense. Knew a couple of the names of the guys who played on the football team, but that was really about it.
Did you have enough knowledge to realize that by the time that you were drafted by them, that they were primarily a running football team, that they relied on defense, and that their quarterback was still developing, and that maybe this wasn't the best place for a wide receiver to be?
Well, that wouldn't be unusual for me because instead of going to Stanford, I went to USC as a wide receiver. And everyone wanted me to go to Stanford because they threw the ball. And USC had John McKay and was running back Heisman Trophy winners. And, that's the route I took because it felt comfortable. And that was my choice. Coming to Pittsburgh, I had not heard of a single wide receiver in Pittsburgh. Okay, so that's good news and bad news. The bad news is it doesn't sound like they're throwing the ball a lot. And the good news is if I haven't heard of anyone on the West Coast from Pittsburgh, maybe there's a chance for me to get in right away.
When you arrived at training camp, the strike was on. Did that give you, not that you had to prove yourself, but I would imagine that even a number one draft choice has to prove that he can make the next step to the next level. Did you get a greater opportunity to do that, even though your eventual starting quarterback was not there?
I think a lot of people did. I think when you look back at the Pittsburgh Steelers football history and how the first Super Bowl championship team was developed, and you look at the addition of the Bradshaws and Joe Greens and LC and so forth and that team, a lot of attention is paid to the draft in 1974. And one of the successes that allowed so many players to make that team, I think, was the fact that we all had to step up and run all the routes, run all the plays, get all the reps at every position because the veterans were away on strike. And so suddenly when the veterans came back, it wasn't a group of unknowledgeable football players. We knew the system. We had the plays down. We knew what we were doing. So when the veterans came in, we tried to exert that confidence, say, look, we've been here for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. We know what we're doing. This is our camp. Of course, when Joe Green and Ernie Holmes come in, it's really their camp.
John talked about when he got to camp and he was worried about making the football team, and he did well early. Your position coach, Lionel Taylor, went to him and said, when Mel gets here, you're not going to be able to do some of the things that you're doing now. And I'm wondering if you felt the same way, that the big guys will eventually be here, and that might alter what you were able to do.
Well, it would alter probably in terms of their physicality, their confidence in what they were doing, other than, as opposed to the rookies who were in camp. But it really shouldn't alter what I'm supposed to do. And I'm going to run my route at the same speed. I'm going to get out there and run it with the same precision. And so they might be a little bit closer, but my thinking is, this is how I run my route. This is the timing we have. Make the catch, and everything's good.
There may not be an answer to this question, but given the circumstance, not in your case, but is it reasonable to suggest that if there's no strike that year, guys like Stallworth, guys like Randy Grossman, guys like Donnie Shell, free agents in the latter case, might not have gotten an opportunity to showcase their skills, and the course of history might have been altered?
I think when you go down that list of rookies who made the team in 1974, there's a pretty good number that may not have had the chance if there was not a strike. Hopefully I would make the team. I think John certainly would make the team. Jack Lambert, Mike Webster, Jimmy Allen, I think would make the team. I think there were a couple of guys on our defensive line. Steve Davis, I think, would have made the team. But there are probably several other guys that may not have had a chance to get in and to fill that comfort level. Donnie Shell may not have had the opportunity to show why he was nicknamed Torpedo, okay? Randy Grossman might not have gotten the reps to show that he was a nifty nifty receiver at tight end and could still do the job blocking. So yeah, I think there would have been a big difference in what the team looked like had there not been a strike.
In your rookie year and in your sophomore season, if you will, you win Super Bowls. And I wonder if it occurred to you, or if the thought crossed your mind that, oh, well, this is what's supposed to happen. And if it just seemed like it was almost too easy to win 2 championships in your first 2 years.
Well, no, it wasn't too easy. There are some difficulties along the way. But, you know, having come from a program at Sarah High School in San Mateo, California, it's just south of San Francisco, we won championships. We lost 3 games in 3 years and won 2 conference championships. At USC, I went to 2 Rose Bowls and we won the national championship. So from my standpoint, I'm accustomed to winning. I think that's the way it's supposed to be. I didn't come to Pittsburgh not to play, and I didn't play football not to win the championship. So I always thought that's the way it should be. It was great being a part of the first team to win an NFL championship and a Super Bowl for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That was a special part. That was a part that, you know, all this time, you know, you're finally at this program and they had never won a championship before, and you get to bring it home. And to do it 2 years in a row, I think solidified for us as a team that we had the talent, and the only thing that's going to stop us is us. And you go from there.
What was that like for a championship-starved city, hadn't made the playoffs for 40 years until 1972, which predated your arrival? What was it like to win that first Super Bowl for as rabid a football community as this is, and as starved as they were for a winner, especially at that time, given the economic circumstances in the city?
Well, I think the immediate response in the locker room after the game is over is, you know, how proud you are and how happy you are for Art Rooney Sr. It's an iconic photo of the Chief standing there holding that Super Bowl trophy, and you can see how humble he was in that picture, and how grateful he was that he was able to bring this team to that point in their history and win this championship. Selecting Chuck Noll and having Chuck Noll be his head coach, and whatever people may have thought about Chuck, here he was, he brought the city their first championship. And so I think that was hugely important. And I think after that, you got a sense of how much the people in Pittsburgh felt that the Pittsburgh Steelers actually belonged to them. It was their football team, not just a team they rooted for, but the team they had supported for 40 years, waiting for a championship, looking for better days, having some sense that better days were about to come with a guy like Joe Green and Bradshaw and others who were there, Mel Blount, L.C. Greenwood, having a sense that, you know, maybe they were on the edge of things. The rivalry with the Raiders and all those things, and beating the Raiders, coming up just short of beating the Miami Dolphins when they had their undefeated season. And suddenly, they're there. Suddenly, it's not an undefeated season. It was a hard-fought 1974 season. The team gets there, you win the Super Bowl, and all of Pittsburgh is elated. And suddenly, the Pittsburgh Steelers and all the people in this town, for that next Super Bowl, a lot more people knew how to get there.
Any team that won 4 championships in a 6-year span is going to be wildly popular. But I wonder if you believe this, and I do, that it was even greater because of the style that the team played. It seemed to fit the fabric of the community of Western Pennsylvania, that they loved to win, the fans, but they loved that kind of football. And I'm wondering if that's the synergy that made the Steelers even more popular than a championship team in any other city would be.
Sure, it seemed to represent the attitude of the city. You know, blue collar, hardworking people. you do it in the trenches. The offensive line, gritty. Defensive line, power, strength, domination. All of those kinds of things. It's not always pretty, but you find a way to win and you do it well. Much to the chagrin of wide receivers who like to go out there and dance a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let's get to that. 74, still kind of a button-down offense. And I'm just wondering, it's hard to pick on one game. But in Super Bowl 10, was that your coming out party? Was that the Steeler pass offense coming out party?
I don't think so. I think probably Super Bowl 13 was more of the coming out of the passing game for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
After the rules changes.
Yeah, after the rule changes, but Bradshaw threw me 5 passes. I only caught, I caught 4 of them. Mark Washington had really good coverage. There were some great plays made in that game. Block kicks that were unbelievable, and people doing a great job. And we win the ball game 21-17. It's not like we blew the Cowboys out, and it's not like we threw a lot of balls down the field. I mean, we threw a couple, and that was it. But it happened to be one of those days and plays where it was in some ways an exceptional day in terms of the catches you make, and other ways kind of typical that Bradshaw gave you an opportunity to make a play for the ball and you had to go do something and make it happen.
Do you remember specifically your routes on the 2 catches we're talking about, the one on the right hash mark and the one on the near sidelines, the camera approach? Do you specifically remember what your assignments were on those plays, and can you vividly recall your route?
Yeah, the first one was really what we call a takeoff. It's just a deep route. And Mark Washington had good coverage. I was running, and he was kind of stride for stride. But Bradshaw threw it. Now today, they might say he was trying to throw a back shoulder pass. But what occurred was he threw it high, and threw it to the outside. Didn't look like any one of us was going to make the catch. But I was able to time it. I felt like I could get to it. And I took a little stutter step, and I go up and arch my body to get over Mark and make the catch. And stumble for a couple more steps before I think it was Cliff Harris who came over and made the tackle. The other play, was supposed to be more of a post pattern, and came in on that pattern. Mark's there again, and it's a mistake. If I'd done it right, I would have caught it the first time. But Mark Washington tips the ball away and stayed focused on the ball on the way down, and was able to keep my body upright enough to make the catch. So you take something that should have been, jumping up in the air and making the catch, or something jumping up, falling down, making it seem more spectacular.
Given Bradshaw's personality, he was a gunslinger and he had no fear, and there has to be a synergy between quarterback and wide receiver. You make great catches on balls that weren't perfectly thrown, and vice versa. Did playing with him give you those kinds of opportunities? Because he had no fear. He always felt, my guys will come down with it.
Sure. I mean, you get a chance to make great plays. It's important on the team, for a team, if you want to win and you're playing against tough competition, sometimes it's not going to be perfect. Sometimes you got to take a risk, and you got to give a guy an opportunity to make a play on the ball. You got to trust that your line or your running back can break a tackle and make a play, that a punt returner can make the first guy miss and pick up 20 yards as opposed to getting nailed right when he catches the ball. And so you want to give people an opportunity to show the talent that they have, the physical capabilities, the artistic capabilities, the desire to be on top and going after the ball. And certainly with Bradshaw, he gave John and I many opportunities to make those kinds of plays. And so in order to get 4 passes thrown your way or 5 passes thrown your way, you got to make the catch, or else Bradshaw's going to go to the other guy. And John and I, we always kind of understood that. It was never spoken, never necessarily articulated that that's how it was. But John and I knew we weren't going to be like the receivers of today, and there was going to be like 15 targets for one guy. There was going to be 4 or 5, and we wanted the 4 or 5. And you got to make the catch. So we had to make sure we kept feeding Bradshaw by catching the ball and giving him the confidence that we'd be there for him.
There weren't divas back then, not that I recall anyway. But were there subtle ways other than making the catch where both you and or John would lobby Bradshaw? Hey, I'm open. I was open. I can get open.
We always told him we were open because we were. One of us was. At least we always felt like we were. We always felt like if we had a half step on someone, we could make it work. And we always did our homework. We were always prepared. So at a lot of football games, I had a play in my pocket, in my hip pocket. I thought, based on film, based on tendency, I could get this guy on this play. So if it came down to something tight, I had one to pull out that maybe we hadn't used. And then you tell Bradshaw, I got him on this play. And so I've done it several times. My rookie year against the Raiders in the AFC Championship game, the touchdown pass I told Chuck I could run the slant and beat Skip Thomas, who went to USC. And I looked at film, and he got beat by Randy Vataha. And I said, well, okay, Randy's a pretty good route runner. Let me look at other film. I found all the film I could at that time on Skip Thomas covering guys who ran slant routes. And so I just put it in my hip pocket. And then all of a sudden there's third down, 7 yards to go for a touchdown. We needed it. I told Chuck. Chuck didn't put it in the first or the second play, but at third down, he said, go in and call the play. Called the play, we get the touchdown, and there it is.
You mentioned people being given opportunities to show their skills. And in conjunction with that, with the rules change, I always felt like, Chuck was a run-first, defense-oriented guy, but he recognized that he had something special, and it opened up wide with the maturation of Bradshaw. I don't want to leave out Jim Smith, who was a tremendous receiver. Was it spoken, or did you knew when you came for the '78 season that this was going to be different now?
Not so much that it was going to be different, but maybe given more opportunity. That if we threw the ball just a little bit more, we could open up the running attack, take advantage of some things. John and I had played well, and probably had a particular reputation. Anybody who played us man-to-man coverage across the board, we were going to have a good day. And we just worked hard at it. So we weren't necessarily looking at it saying we're going to get a lot more passes. But when you look at that '78 season, and then you look at the Super Bowl and the way we played and the kind of plays we threw and how it all worked out, and Bradshaw becomes the MVP of his first of his 2 MVPs. That was just us opening up a little bit. But I don't think it was a huge opening of the passing attack. I think it's just a little more balanced.
I spoke with John in Super Bowl 13. You got off to a bad start. You're in a hole right from the get-go. And his long pass and run, 75, it changed the momentum of the game. But a lot of people think that the touchdown pass that Terry threw to you was the dagger in Dallas's heart.
Well, it's interesting.
That and Jackie Smith.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because John scored 2 touchdowns, I think, in the first half. And I actually put that play in. And Bradshaw was supposed to call it to my side, called it to John's side. Okay. But the second time we ran that play was in the second half. And it looks like a different play because it's a shorter field. But we had to make an adjustment on the fly. So I make it look like it's going to be a slant. He pump fakes it. I turn it up, and that's what John did. And both safeties were gone, and John catches it and walks into the end zone. When I had to run it, the safeties weren't going to get fooled twice. So I ran the slant. He faked it. All right, and the safety didn't come up hard like he had before. And so what I did was I just had to fade it back to the right, fade it a little back to the outside, not run into the safety. Bradshaw floated it up there, and we were able to make the connection. But, that's what happens when the quarterback is saying, I'm going to throw you the ball. And so he sees the adjustments, you're on the same page, and you make it work.
One last question about that game. Benny Barnes, incidental contact?
Well, that's the way he called it.
There must be then, right? It must be that.
Someone in today's game would throw a red flag on that one.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Or did a challenge from upstairs.
Yes.
Absolutely, no question about that. Super Bowl 14, you play a big part in that as well. I'm wondering, as you entered that game, Lynn, in your home area at Pasadena with 30,000 Steeler fans there came across. It was unbelievable. The giant, terrible towel they spread out. I wonder if before that game, given all the success you had, maybe you look around, your own circumstance notwithstanding, and said, we've done a lot, but we've also been together a long time. Did it enter your mind at all, either before that game against the Rams or after it was over and you won again, that this isn't going to go on forever? I mean, we've got some guys, and Joe only played a couple more years, and so on and so forth. I wonder if you thought that this is important to win just because, but also because it's not going to go on forever.
At Super Bowl 14, number 4 coming up, I thought, we're kind of moving around pretty good, but this is my 6th year, and I naively thought, I'm only going to play 3 or 4 years in professional football. But things were working out pretty well, so you stay a little bit longer. And so here we are at the Super Bowl. And it was much more relaxed. It was a whole different vibe in that Super Bowl. I think I had something like 90 tickets for the game, and my family and college friends, everybody's coming to the football game in the Rose Bowl. And we're staying down in Newport Beach. And so everybody seemed to be so much more relaxed. Even that shot that the NFL shows of Chuck Noll coming off the field at halftime. I mean, and he pretends like he's going to run over the cameraman and just laughs. When have you ever seen Chuck laugh on the sideline other than that moment?
That's what made it so significant. Because,
very significant. But that's kind of where we were. And we felt good about where we were and who we were. So I don't think a lot of people were thinking about retirement. Okay? Guys who were hurt in that ball game, who didn't play, who had some injuries. I think the older guys were starting to think a little bit more about that. But I think for me, and I've never heard John talk about thinking about retiring after 6 or 7 years, or that the team wasn't going to be strong enough. I felt like we could still be competitive.
Ultimately, because you had set yourself sort of a short lifespan in NFL football, which lasted longer than perhaps you thought, was it injuries or just the realization that it's time to retire?
No, it was a plan. And the plan came to fruition 1 year earlier than I thought it might. But Stan, I started working in broadcasting after my 2nd year in football. So in 1976, I was working for KABC TV in Los Angeles. I tried to get a job here in Pittsburgh, but they wouldn't hire me. But
I know the feeling.
yeah. So I went back to school and took graduate courses in TV and radio production, took a writing class, took a speech class. I took an acting class to develop, to see and figure out what my on-camera persona would be like or should be like, depending on the role. And then I started working for the network. I started doing shows for ABC in the off season. So I was sitting in Mount Lebanon. It was December, early December, at a friend's house. His name was Gary Brown. Used to own the Green Tree Racket Club. And I got, had a phone call. And so I called back this guy from ABC. And they want me to be, the reporter or the the color announcer for the USFL. And they had gotten this contract. There's going to be a new league, etc. And so we talked on the phone. We talked contract, negotiated the contract. And so I had negotiated a contract that would actually pay me more than I was getting paid by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so, Stan, you look at that and you say, maybe I'd want to play 1 more year. Number of guys, like you said, had already retired. You start to balance it, and let's be realistic. Wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, 9 years, 4 Super Bowls. Okay, no wide receiver is going to be the league MVP. Okay, we don't throw the ball enough. What was I leaving on the table? What had I not personally accomplished, and what had our team not accomplished in that 9 years? We got it all. Okay, and so could I get hurt in the last game? Sure. Could I play next year and get an injury? Yeah, maybe, but I wasn't even thinking about that. What I was thinking of is I could sign a contract and get more money as a broadcaster and have a longer career than playing football. So at the end of the day, I played 9 years of professional football, left nothing on the table. I played and went 30 years as a broadcaster for ABC. That's why I left.
No brainer. I'm wondering, I've had so many former players from that era tell me that maybe it registered while they were still playing, maybe it didn't register until later. But I'm wondering if in your interactions with Chuck Noll, either individually or as a team, if anything that he talked about, lessons that he taught in addition to football, resonated with you and helped shape whatever decisions you made after your playing career.
Well, Chuck was always engaged in so many other things other than football. I mean, he worked really hard at football. This was his profession, and he was a pro. So he left nothing undone. But he was interested in photography. He was interested in how to continue to develop players in a better way, changing the weightlifting program for all the players on the team, enhancing that particular program. He was flying his own plane around. He loved art, he loved music, was engaged in all of these things. So he had a lot of different interests. And I've always felt, for me, that was inspiring, because there are lots of other things I wanted to look at and I was engaged in. And I wanted to continue to be a part of those kinds of things and develop. So that's why I worked in the off season. And keep in mind, Stan, we've talked a lot about things around football. The dollars and cents in professional football when we came in were nothing near what they are today. And so when Chuck talks about getting to your life's work, guys who had considerably long careers still had to have another job in the career once they're finished playing professional football. The free agents who made that team were making what? Minimum wage was $12,500, and so a $25,000 Super Bowl check was a big deal. All right, so at the end of the day, they're talking about $37,500. Okay, you better plan ahead for the future. You better figure out what else you're going to do next, because that wasn't a lot of money. It was more money than most of us have ever seen before at that time, but it just wasn't a lot of money. And you couldn't bank on it for the rest of your life. Today's player, different issues. They have a lot more money. They've got to be very smart about how they invest it. But now we're talking about guys who can invest money and have a future versus guys that have to develop another career.
I was at your Hall of Fame induction ceremony in Canton, and that was memorable in and of itself, and the Steeler fans would just flock there. It was always an amazing event. In fact, they got to a point where they would, if there was a Steeler, they would always make him last, because if they put him second, everybody would take off. Yeah, exactly. But you endorsed the induction of John Stallworth. That will always stay with me. Is that something that you had thought about for a while? Did it occur to you during the speech to do that?
Well, Stan, you've seen things in broadcast and folks who get nominated, who get in the Hall of Fame. And they get in for a lot of different reasons. There's lots of different ways to get into the Hall of Fame. But very few people get into the Hall of Fame, at that time period, unless you see them, who stay present, if you will, who they might be retired, but you always see them on TV doing something and they're engaged, they're broadcasting, etc. And so boom, all of a sudden they're in. I felt like John was doing great things. Extraordinarily successful businessman. But he was in Huntsville, Alabama, okay, and down in Madison. And so John was living a extraordinarily successful life, but by all news media concerned, a quiet life. And I felt that part of my job, my teammate and my friend, was to elevate John, just to give him that platform. And that's why I asked John to introduce me at the Hall of Fame for my induction. And that's why I said, if this is supposed to be your greatest moment, your greatest hour, then it's only a half hour, because it won't be complete unless John Stallworth is in the Hall of Fame. And that was just my feeling, okay? The fact that John got into the Hall of Fame next year, I think it was just everything to do with John deserving to be there. And maybe some of the voters said sometimes we canceled each other out. Sometimes they vote for John, sometimes they vote for me, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, that shouldn't have mattered. Heck, at the end of the day, they should have just put us both in at the same time.
And years earlier than it actually happened. Do you still keep in touch with some of your former teammates? And even if you don't, is there that bond that can, as they say, shall not be torn asunder?
There is a bond. We all see Terry on TV, but we hardly ever see him in person. At least I have not seen him much. I talk to John, we talk on the phone. We've done some engagements together, that kind of thing. And certainly when I could, I went down and supported his golf tournament, for scholarships to Alabama A&M. Jack Ham and I were neighbors. So we did a lot of things together, and I'll still pick up the phone and call Jack and see how he's doing. I'll call Dr. Yates, who's a team doctor and lived in the same neighborhood. So we stay in contact. And it's great to come back to Pittsburgh, to be here for an event, whether it's a celebration of a Super Bowl, a reunion of a particular year, those kinds of things, getting together, having dinner, seeing Rocky. I mean, and sometimes you think maybe you don't call them enough. And guys have passed and you didn't get a chance to say goodbye to. A lot of our friends, a lot of our teammates have passed. And we probably should do it more often.
It's a cliche, but it's not, because it's true. You can take the guy out of Pittsburgh, but you just can't take the Pittsburgh out of the guy.
Pittsburgh is a great place. Pittsburgh is one of those experiences that had not the Steelers ever drafted me, I would have never known what I know now about Pittsburgh, about its history, about the people, about the businesses here in Pittsburgh, about the people who started those businesses were great philanthropists, not just in this country, but around the world. And you go to Monet's garden and you see names, the Carnegies and the Scapes, who have helped to rebuild and those kinds of monuments, those kinds of pieces of history and art. You see the Hillmans and what they did and contributed to this area. And I was born actually in Alcoa, Tennessee, okay? And I come to Pittsburgh, which is the home of Alcoa Aluminum. And the Hunt family, the patriarch invited me, I think it was my second year, invited me to go on a game hunt with him. And I said, no, I'm not going, because I naively thought if life was a circle, I would end up back in Alcoa.
Okay.
No, I love Alcoa, but I didn't want to go back to live in Alcoa. But it's all of those things I would have never known had I not been drafted by the Steelers. And certainly, all of this experience, all of the opportunities, all of the friendships, the tough winters, trudging through the snow, driving to the airport, and dealing with all these kinds of things, the ups and downs of the teams, the things that shaped me as a young man coming out of college. I couldn't have picked a place that would work out better than Pittsburgh did for me.
Mutually beneficial, may I say. Lynn, great catching up with you. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Stan.